Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today for our April speaker series. We have speakers from the Missouri Network Against Child Abuse to present on preventing child sexual abuse with us today. So before we pass it along to them, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Kate Drury, who's going to give an overview of who we are at the Missouri Academy for Child Trauma Studies and our connection with the St. Louis Child Advocacy Center and the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Kate?
We're the Missouri Academy for Child Trauma Studies, part of our CAC here in St. Louis Child Advocacy Center, part of UMSL. We're the training arm for the CAC, and we train over 1,500 people a year in trauma-informed practices and other topics related to child trauma. We are both a Category 2 and a Category 3 site of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network through SAMHSA. And we have some upcoming trainings that we wanted to be sure to tell everyone about. We have one next Friday about addressing grief within TFCBT. I'll be facilitating that one. Then we have a peer review launch event for forensic providers. Correct me if I'm wrong, Nikki. Mickey Lane will be facilitating that one. And then that starts on April 29th.
Okay, I'm on. Okay.
Then we have
Yeah.
a supervision workshop on May 15th. We're going to do parts 1 and 2 of working with caregivers later in May. And then we have addressing complex trauma within TFCBT, both parts 1 and 2 at the end of June. So please, if you want to attend, please jump on over to the MoACTS website where you'll be able to register for those events. And just as a reminder, this is part of our speaker series, which we have offered for over 20 years on the third Thursday of the month. Same time, same day for 20 years. We have done the third Thursday of the month, a presentation about child trauma from 8:30 in the morning till 10. These are always free presentations that we would love for you to attend. We've got some interesting topics coming up. Next month, we're going to talk about preschool kids and how to help them in the aftermath of trauma. Then we're going to be talking about how to engage parents who might be disbelieving or minimizing. And then we'll be talking about ethics. So we'd love to have you. All right, I'm going to pass it over to our team from the Missouri Network Against Child Abuse. Thank you so much for being here.
Right. Thank you so much, Kate and Tenley and MoACTS for having us. I'm going to ask the classic question of someone who just shared their screen. Can y'all see my screen? Okay, perfect. Excellent. Well, we are going to get started in just a minute. First, we have a couple of folks here on the call with us this morning, as Kate mentioned. So we're going to take just a moment to introduce ourselves. My name is Kiki Saragnis. I am the Director of Prevention and Outreach at MO-NACA, the Missouri Network Against Child Abuse.
Yeah, and I'm Jessica Seitz. I'm the Executive Director of Missouri Network Against Child Abuse.
And I'm Randy Hemme. I'm the Prevention and Outreach Specialist here at Missouri Network Against Child Abuse.
Excellent. Well, we're really glad to be here with you all on this lovely Thursday morning in April. April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, so we feel really lucky to be able to speak with you all in the middle of Child Abuse Prevention Month and to talk a little bit about what we do at MO-NACA as well as child abuse prevention zoomed out a little bit more. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Jessica to get us started.
Sure. Again, thanks for having us. So I'm going to provide kind of a broad stroke of all of our, who we are as an agency, and then I'm going to turn it over to this prevention team to take a deep dive. They're the experts. So, so our agency, this is our kind of core tenets that you're seeing in front of you. We provide training, community education, and child advocacy, and we've got kind of multiple audiences. We have child abuse professionals, many of which of you are on this. We also work with, have programming that is directed toward the general public and communities. And then our other partners in the space of child abuse prevention and intervention. So all of which combine to provide children with access to safety, justice, and healing. So next slide. So our work can be kind of classified into four pillars. They all sort of overlap into a giant kind of Venn diagram, but we wear several hats. And I'd also want to just clarify that we're a state organization. Our organization, we're not direct service providers. We are a team of 9 that are scattered throughout the state. We do have an office in Jefferson City and a few staff that live in Jefferson City. But then there's a couple of us that are based in St. Louis, Kansas City, Raleigh. So, we're kind of all over. So just letting you know where we are. So one hat that we wear that takes, that is a huge amount of our work is, in our membership support and networking. We are the State Association of Child Advocacy Centers. So the St. Louis CAC is one of our members. We're going to go into the CACs here in a second, but in that role, we provide through various staff members training and peer networking opportunities for CAC directors, CAC forensic interviewers, all the different folks, as well as some of the networks that are within our prevention and our medical program. And then on the advocacy and response side, we are responsible and proud to represent all of those audiences that I said earlier. We do a lot of work in the Capitol. We have a statewide advocacy program. I am actually a registered lobbyist, and we work with both the legislature as well as administrative agencies like Children's Division, sometimes Department of Health, sometimes Department of Mental Health, all of those to, bring the interests of this field to the decision makers, and then the other way, bring what is happening there down to, or to our membership and partners. And then the professional training and certification. So many of you may have engaged in some of our programming. And before the last 2 years, we also used to be known as Missouri Kids First. So just letting you know that if you participated in a training 5-10 years ago, it was Missouri Kids First. That was us. So we are the kind of certified provider of Child First forensic interview training. We have the Safe Care Medical Program, which is a Department of Health and Senior Services program done in partnership with Children's Mercy Hospital, Cardinal Glennon, and St. Louis Children's. And through that partnership, we are the deliverer of trainings as well as the certification for individuals who become safe care providers. And then we have other professional trainings that we offer, those for victim advocates, for CACs, multidisciplinary team members, kind of across our programs, which I'll go to in a second. And then finally, we have our community education and outreach. And that's going to be where a lot of our community-facing trainings and education come from, and like that, the things that Kiki and Randy are going to touch on later. But we do a lot of large trainings, presentations at conferences, like some of you may have been at the Children's Trauma Network Summit last week. You would have seen our team there, several presentations. So on all of these different subjects that we work on. So that's kind of the 4 pillars. So we're going to go through them, but know that they fit within these 4. So next one. All right, Child Advocacy Centers. We're going to play a quick video.
Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I have the audio set up for our video. Oops. Okay. All right.
A Children's Advocacy Center, or CAC, provides support to victims of child abuse. Without a CAC, an abused child may have to tell their story over and over again in settings that may be scary or where kids may think that they're in trouble. Then, families have to search around for the services their children need, all on their own. But in a CAC, a child tells their story to a trained interviewer who makes the process gentle on the child and finds the facts which are crucial to the child's case. Then, a community of professionals in medicine, law enforcement and child protective services, prosecution, victim advocacy, and other heroes work through the CAC to decide the best way to help the child. And CACs provide science-backed mental health care that heals kids from trauma and helps them reclaim their futures. This community of caring professionals rallies around the child so children have everything they need, all in one place, at the CAC. To find your local CAC or to sign up for updates, visit nationalchildren'salliance.org.
All right, so here in Missouri, we have 15 regional child advocacy centers, and several of them have satellites, but we provide child advocacy center services as a state in every county in Missouri. And this is the map you see here. Every single county has a signed MOU or interagency agreement with the members of the multidisciplinary team. So Children's Division, law enforcement, prosecution, medical, and so on for every single county here. So you can see when I say hubs, you can see, for example, down in Southwest Missouri, we have our Joplin Center that has 3 different satellites. Just to kind of explain the role, they have satellites in Monette, Butler, and Nevada. Springfield has a big center in Springfield, but also down in West Plains. So just kind of letting you know where folks are with the child advocacy centers here. And I'm going to go into their work here in a second. So keep going. All right. So our advocacy and response. This has been a big part of our work since we were founded. In fact, we were founded almost 20 years ago by actually 25 years ago, by the different child advocacy center directors who came together and wanted to form a network to collectively advocate or lobby, but advocate on behalf of child advocacy centers and the kids and families they were serving and issues that were impacting them. So this is really one of the reasons we were founded, and it continues to be a huge amount of our work. So one of those things that's not on the slide that isn't every year is that we have resources in our state financially and at the federal level that serve child advocacy centers and the other programs we work on. You've probably seen in the news that our budget, for example, is very tight federally and at the state level. And so a huge amount of our work, both at MoNaca and then we pull in our members, is ensuring that funding and resources continue for our work. So we work every year, we work on, there's state funding for child advocacy centers. Many of you are touched by the Victims of Crime Act funding, which is federal. All of those things, we want to ensure that they stay as much as possible in our budget and that our centers are able to maximize the resources that the state has invested. So funding is like half of our advocacy time, depending on more or less on the year. And then we go for policies. So we actually, in 2026, we're right smack in the middle of legislative session here in Missouri, and we just had a win. Actually, the governor signed into law a large trafficking bill last week, which was incredibly early. Usually bills get signed in the summer, pass right before they step out in May. But the legislature really got moving. So a couple of things that I just want to highlight that literally just happened is that there was a bill that would change all references to child pornography in our criminal code to child sexual abuse material, reflecting what this is. Language matters. We have to call it what it is. And so this was something that we have been pushing for several years. A couple of other states are doing the same, and they're actually looking at the federal level. So Missouri was kind of a leader in this. We also established permanently a statewide task force on trafficking, both adults and children, within the Attorney General's office. So that was in there. There were other pieces. It was a big bill. So there were other pieces related to sextortion and grooming laws, all of it wrapped up. And it was one of the first bills that was passed this year. And like I said, signed by the governor last week. Last year, we also had a banner year. So as in a field, not just at MoNaca, but the field had a banner year. Missouri became the first state in the United States to ban the use of non-disclosure agreements in cases of child sexual abuse. This issue, for example, was in response to, some of you may have heard about the abuse happening at Camp Kanakuk down in Southwest Missouri. This was an issue where there was widespread abuse within this camp, this institution, sexual abuse that went on for over a decade, but the victims were silenced by the institution's use of non-disclosure agreements. And so their voices were not allowed to be brought forward about their abuse that they suffered. And then, therefore, it protected the institution. And when this was uncovered, people were horrified. That was not supposed to be the use of a non-disclosure agreement. NDAs are typically used by companies to protect intellectual property. That's what they were meant to do, not protect predators. So this was brought. We banned the use here in Missouri last year. Texas was right there with us. So 2 states, and then it's spreading throughout the country and has been introduced to the federal level as well. We also raised the age of marriage to 18, again, making Missouri the leader. Like that doesn't always happen, so you have to flag it when it does. We've, worked on a lot of other things over the years too. Our work spans the prevention and intervention space. So we have worked on legislation that would provide oversight for youth residential facilities that were unlicensed. This was in response to some of the abuse that came up during Agape and Circle of Hope. Again, that was all over the news. That was a very coalition-based. We have required our partners as well as survivor voices to get that through. And then we've worked on child sexual abuse prevention education in schools. And then, same with prevention training for all school board members. So these are just the type. We have a legislative agenda every year that is diverse, but these are some of the highlights to try to give you kind of a broad scope of the work that we do. This is, like I said, done in partnership with our child advocacy centers. What we work on is informed by what they're telling us is happening and needs to change, as well as other partners. So anyway, that's our work. Our goal is to convene, to educate, and ensure that our legislators have their head on straight, which can be a feat, which is why you got to be back there every year. All right, switching gears to member support and networking. We have three programs within this that we want to highlight today. We have our multidisciplinary team enhancement initiative, the Safe Care Network, and our newer program, which is CSEC, the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. So MDT. All right, when you saw in the video earlier, explaining CACs, you heard the term MDT, multidisciplinary team. And really what that means is that there are a number of professionals that are responsible for protecting our kids and keeping them safe and doing an investigation of child abuse. There's a lot of different folks who have a stake and an interest in this. So all of those are represented here in this model. But if they're not working together as a team, you're going to see different investigations all over the place. You're going to see children interviewed multiple times. And we want to reduce the trauma that children have already experienced. We want to reduce the trauma of the investigation and the overall healing process. So folks work together in a multidisciplinary team. The CAC kind of serves as a hub of this MDT. And so something we do at MoNaca is ensuring that all of these little circles around here are have access to training. It can be hard. It can be hard to work together in all of our counties here in Missouri. It can be hard. Everybody needs training. These times to be brought together when we have issues. MoNaca is here to help kind of provide technical assistance. So our MDT enhancement initiative is really meant to ensure that every member of this diagram is prepared to work together. And we want to join our CACs in that work to provide that help. So that's one of our initiatives. We have a staff member leading that, but we all kind of work on MDT work because it's really the foundation of the CAC model. And then what's the next one? All right, Safe Care. I think we've got 2 slides on this, so I don't want to. Safe Care program. It's been around for about 20 years, and Missouri, again, is kind of a leader in this space. And MoNaca coordinates Safe Care. So, like I said, we do this in partnership with the three larger children's hospitals here in Missouri. In order to be a safe care provider, you have to go through, you can be a nurse practitioner, physician's assistant, or a physician, but you have to go through a very kind of standardized training of both foundational training and ongoing education to continue being a certified or to be a safe care provider. So safe care providers provide examination, physical and sexual abuse examinations. Sometimes they do that. They are at child advocacy centers. They can also be an independent provider, and then they can be a provider at one of the children's hospitals. So in Missouri, the reason I said we're kind of a leader is that to have this standardized training and certification system, and then kind of coordinated at the state level, where all those providers see each other, have continuing education together, is something, somewhat unique. And believe it or not, it's been around for 20 years. So at MoNaca, we coordinate all of those things. So this is how the medical response to the slide you're seeing right now is how the medical response to child abuse happens here in Missouri. So, or ideally nationally, but here in Missouri, which is that all children who are suspected victims of child abuse are entitled to a medical examination by someone who is trained to identify and respond in the most trauma-informed way. So, this is the different areas. Um, there is both a kind of forensics component, which is that findings can be used in an overall investigation of child abuse, and our safe care providers can be called to testify to explain the findings. But there's also a health and well-being and a healing component, which is children being assured that their bodies are healthy despite what has happened to them. And it's meant to be a part of, so when, earlier I referenced justice and healing, the safe care, this is how the safe care, plays what they play in this. And our providers are fantastic. And so we're always happy to talk about safe care. We also have a designated staff who runs this program. And the final thing I want to flag that Safe Care provides is they also, those providers train MDT members in. So we call them medical forensics trainings, which are trainings for MDT. It's meant to be medical training light for those of you, just so you know what a safe care provider is and how you're supposed to work with them. So as MDT members, so that's one of the things that the safe care providers and network delivers. Whew, I'm going to try to keep going. We got a lot going on. On our final program, this is, like I said, our newer program is our CSEC program. CSEC is more formal word for child sex trafficking. The definition of the actual formal definition of CSEC is on this slide. Um, this is a program that we receive at MoNaca. It's in partnership with Children's Division. We have a pass-through program with 4 sites at CACs. We have one in Joplin, and then one down in Southeast Missouri, Kansas City, and then Northeast Missouri in St. Charles County. And the idea is that we know that CSEC is similar in child sexual abuse cases that child advocacy centers work and treat, but they can be a different population, and require different folks to be involved. And so it's a more specialized service that child advocacy centers do, and we coordinate that through different trainings, community education, all of that. So this is our newest program, and like I said, this one is one, just kind of like all of the programs, this is one that fits that we do all of our pillars. We have membership support, we have professional certification. It's something we lobby on constantly. It's a very hot issue, and it requires a lot of education. So that's our CSEC program. I already touched on these in the beginning, but yes, these are the things, the professional training and certification that you can find through MoNaca. We are the only provider here in Missouri of child forensic interview training. We do that in partnership with our Child First faculty, who are certified trainers at our CACs. We have mandated reporter training that we both provide online through a program that Missouri Network delivers online. And then we have a Train the Trainer, which is one of our newest, which is a training for individuals who are going to deliver the training all over the state. So then we've got the safe care, and then we have prevention, which Kiki and Randy are going to go into in a second. All right. Same with this. So in the community education, remember, these are the ones that are more focused on the general public. And folks, we have our mandated reporter training, which is protectmokids.com. That's been taken by like over 100,000 people. It's taken between 10 and 20,000 people a year. It's one of our largest trainings, or is not one of, it is our largest training. And that isn't even counting the mandated reporter trainings that are done in person by our partners. So protectmokids.com, again, if you see that, know that that's us. And like, oh yeah, well, there you go. We have a slide just on it. What? There you go. So this is, you can tell that my team put a great slide together. So mandated reporter training is directed toward those professionals who are mandated to report child abuse. So we're talking physicians, school professionals, social workers, law enforcement. That is the list of individuals who are mandated is outlined in law, but that's not always enough. It's important for individuals who are mandated reporters to know what abuse looks like, to know how to report it, then what happens when you do report it, and all of that. And so the Protect Mo Kids and our in-person trainings that our folks deliver are, try to cover that and kind of support those mandated reporters, because that's a big responsibility, but it's so important. So I think I'm
I
turning.
can take over from here, Jess. You ready?
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So just touched briefly just a moment ago when she was talking about our pillars, but in our community education that we provide and all of the education that we provide around the state, our goal is, between professionals and just community members, is we believe that it's every adult's responsibility to keep kids safe. So with that, the Stewards of Children training is more, it's aimed towards community members and professionals combined. Most adults don't realize just the impact they have on children. So even someone who's like working at a dentist's office or a doctor's office, they have a direct impact, like working with children. So this training, anyone has any type of involvement with children at all, we recommend that. Mo-NACA, we function as the central support hub for Missouri Stewards of Children for the training network. So Stewards of Children stands out as one of the only evidence-informed, adult-focused child sexual abuse prevention training programs in the United States, proven to increase knowledge and behavior. It was developed by Darkness to Light, and it's an award-winning program. It's a video-driven training, and it's about 2.5 hours. There's a series of videos that are led by adults with lived experience, and then experts and treatment providers. Then in between each video, there's also like robust conversation with all of the attendees. So if you were interested in taking this training, you can contact the St. Louis CAC and they'll be able to help coordinate with that. They have an authorized facilitator there, and we have over 70 facilitators around the state. Some of the features, like I said, was you have the robust conversations that you're getting from it. And the 3 things that you're learning from it are how to make choices that protect children, taking risks to minimize the danger to children, and then how to support one another. And then you'll also learn 5 steps to protect children. And like I was saying, and Kiki, you can go to the next slide. Like I said, we believe it's every adult's responsibility to keep kids safe, because whether we realize it or not, child sexual abuse affects all of us. The consequences of child sexual abuse are devastating for survivors and extend to those close to them and to the broader community, serving as a root cause for various social and health problems. Child sexual abuse stands as one of the most prevalent health challenges children face. So another way that we provide training around the state is we offer something called Awareness to Action. It's a 6-month training program that works with organizations, like at the organization level, to review their current practices and to discuss best practices and to consult so that we can enact change. Kiki is the contact for our ATOA here in Missouri. Kiki, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Absolutely. Awareness to Action is, like Randy said, it's a training and consultation program that was built out of the CDC's recommendations from this great desk guide resource that they put out several years ago about preventing best practices for preventing child sexual abuse in youth serving organizations. A lot of research has gone out or went into that publication, and we collaborated with an organization called Children's Wisconsin, as you can imagine, in Wisconsin, to adapt the program that they built out in Wisconsin to bring it to Missouri to our youth serving organizations. We have provided this training and the consultation and TA, technical assistance and support to youth serving organizations around Missouri, from childcare agencies, churches. Right now, we're working with a neighborhood kind of based youth empowerment organization, a camp for children and adolescents with autism, and with an organization that serves unhoused and housing insecure families in Kansas City. So the tools and the resources that are a part of Awareness to Action are pretty broadly and universally applicable to any organization that serves youth. We're all about making organizations safer and fostering a culture that centers child safety and well-being. And any organization that works with youth can do that, and most of them want to. They just need the support and resources to get to that place.
We're ready for the next slide. All right, and now we get to involve you. This is a time like if we were doing an in-person training where we'd be able to hand out candy, but since we're doing it virtually, we'll just do like the little react emotions. So we're just going to do a few questions, and you can either drop your answers in the chat or feel free to just answer aloud, because this is more of a conversational part of the training. So our first question is, how would you define child sexual abuse? So if you're not comfortable answering out loud, then you can drop your answers in the chat. Oh, Kiki brought some virtual candy.
I'll be adventurous, even though I'm not adventurous. I know what child sexual abuse is. I would say it is any person, an adult or another youth, who is intentionally looking at, talking about private body parts, touching private body parts, or any sort of sexual activity with a child under the age of 18. Sorry, I can't video. We talked about this earlier in the week with Kiki and Randy. My computer will freeze, so.
No worries. Thanks for chiming in, Jamie. Okay, and then Amy also mentioned in the chat, she said any acts of sexual nature, including grooming, perpetrated on a child. Okay, so then here on the slide, we have some different examples for you. Child sexual abuse includes physical sexual contact with a minor, such as touching or forced to touch, exposure to sexual behavior or sexually explicit material, capturing images or videos of a nude child or engaging a minor in sexual performance. And sexual abuse can be perpetrated by an adult or another child or another youth, however you want to define that. Is there any comments or questions on that before we move on to our next question? Okay. All right, so our next question is, how prevalent do you feel child sexual abuse is? And again, you can drop your answers in the chat or you can answer aloud and we can talk about it. Okay, Jamie's put in the chat, 1 in 10 children before turning 18 are sexually abused. Does everyone agree with that, or does anyone have a different number? And Joan said, unfortunately, very prevalent. Courtney added, I believe it happens often. Unfortunately, many incidents do not get reported. She would say 4 in 10 children. Tiffany added, she feels like it's very prevalent, unfortunately. And Amy said, so much more than we know because so many go unreported. And another participant put unknown as many are afraid to speak out, which is very true. Kiki, if we go to the next slide. So the statistics that we know of show that 1 in 10 children experience sexual abuse before they're 18. But like many of you in the comments said, those statistics might be skewed a little because so many children are scared to report or might not know that what is happening to them is wrong, like at a younger age, just based on like what's going on in their household. They may not be exposed to many people outside of the household, like if they're homeschooled or like that was not a knock to homeschool, but if they're like in an area where they're not exposed to a lot of education about what abuse is, they might think that that is just normal behavior. So statistically, it's 1 in 10, but we don't actually know the true number to that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so our next question is, who do you feel perpetrates child sexual abuse? I like Christy's answer. She said monsters. Katie said everyone. Jamie said youth and adults. Pamela added members and friends of the family. Courtney said it could be anyone, but I think statistics would say it's often family members. Okay. So with that, we have like a central theme that it's usually, if it's whether friends or family, it's someone that the child knows typically. So 90% of children who report sexual abuse are harmed by someone that they know and have some type of relationship with. I think for a lot of us growing up, there was always that bad guy in the bushes that was going to jump out that we were always warned about. But like statistics show that it's typically someone the child knows. All right, our next question is, how common do you feel grooming is?
And I forgot to add this in the slide. This is the first time we're using that word grooming in here. So folks are probably familiar with this, but let me just toss out a little quick definition. So when we're talking about grooming in this context, we're talking about boundary violating behaviors, right? That someone is using intentionally to desensitize a child to inappropriate or sexual behavior.
A few people in here saying very common, extremely more common than we realize. Jamie added, in most cases, there's likely some form of grooming. So like Kiki just talked about the definition, boundary violating behaviors or grooming precedes sexual abuse in more than 90% of known perpetrator cases. So almost always there's some type of grooming involved. And our last question, on our virtual candy spree here is how often is child sexual abuse initiated by other youth? So how often do you think a child initiates abuse on another child? Okay, Frida said very often. Christy said 20%. Jamie's going to set this one out. Okay. Erica said it's very common. Kim said increasingly more common. We're getting a lot, like multiple more comments here with common. Tiffany said, I believe this is very common because a lot of have been victims themselves. And then Courtney kind of echoed that. And she said about 30% of the time. Alyssa said less than half of the time. it's a child. So this is, okay, we have one more that said at least half. Recent studies suggest that 70 to 75% of the time, child sexual abuse is initiated by a peer or an older youth. So Kiki's going to take over from here and kind of talk about how we can help prevent child abuse and in peer-on-peer abuse.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Randy. Thanks for taking us through and doing some level setting and making sure that we're kind of all coming to this prevention conversation with some of the same, knowledge and information. We're not going to throw a whole lot of data or stats or numbers at you after this. Some people really respond to data and numbers, and some of us just don't, right? For some of us, we're like, I need to hear the stories, right? I need to see the narrative. So I appreciate folks who were kind of answering questions the way that makes most sense. Some people were tossing out numbers. Some people were saying, from their experience or from the folks that they work with, like a lot. We're seeing it a lot. It's happening. It's increasing. So appreciate that. And, we could do a whole other hour-long conversation about this data point right here, right? Why this is increasing, why we're seeing these numbers growing. We're asking different questions, but also young people have access to different kinds of material. There's a lot of environmental factors that are changing the way that abuse happens. But what we're going to do from right now is move forward from this place of having some of this shared knowledge and information about child abuse and use this to talk a little bit about prevention and moving upstream. We know that we live in a world where people are being hurt, right? So we know that we need folks like the people on this call, folks like the people in our organizations, in our communities that are serving children and families who have experienced violence or abuse or neglect, to make sure that they're safe, that they have what they need to heal, and that we can make sure that they aren't victimized again. And we also know that when we live in worlds and communities where violence is happening, that we have to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to prevent additional violence from happening, right? To change the circumstances that allow violence to continue. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and what that means for us. So to start this conversation, there are a couple of what I like to call, or what we like to call, core prevention beliefs that we all have to be able to operate from. So if you're interested in hearing more about where these came from and how they got there, we have a great webinar that we actually did last week all about these messages and how to use them to build readiness in communities for prevention. And that's available on our YouTube page. But we're going to start just from here, from square one, right? So in order to prevent child abuse, we have to understand these 4 core beliefs at minimum, right? We have to understand that, one, child abuse happens in every community, right? And for some of us, we're like, yeah, of course it does, right? I'm dealing with the after effects of this in my life, in my work, in my family, in my community all the time. For some people, they hear that and their knee-jerk reaction is, no, it doesn't, not in my community, right? That could never happen in my community. And there are lots of reasons, right, why folks might have that reaction. A lot of it is, it feels really scary for some of us to acknowledge that abuse is happening, right? That people around us that maybe we trust, right, could harm someone else, especially a child. So it makes sense that some of us are holding on to these kind of self-protective beliefs. The second thing, right, that we need to grapple with after we understand and know that child abuse is happening, right, is that we can take a sigh of relief because child abuse is preventable. We can prevent child abuse from happening. It is not inevitable. A lot of us have lived in a world for maybe our whole lives where we were seeing abuse and abuse happen, right? Or we were dealing with the outcomes and the aftermath. And so it has felt inevitable for a lot of us for a long time. The good news, right, is that it isn't. There's a lot that we can do to keep children safe and to make our community safer places for them, for kids and families. So once we understand and really buy into the idea that abuse is preventable, we have to realize that we are the ones we're waiting for, right? Adults are responsible for preventing child abuse. We cannot put this on children, right? It is not their responsibility to keep themselves safe from adults' harm. And then here's the tough one, right? The heavy lift. Preventing child sexual abuse requires us, the adults, right, to change our behaviors, our mindsets, and our environments. So this is where we're going to dig in and talk and focus for the rest of our time together this morning. And my slides just do not want to go. Okay, so we are going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to talk about some risk factors and protective factors. So I imagine that most of us on this call, if not everyone, have heard this before. This is probably not the very first time you're hearing someone talk about these, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because we may have talked about them in different contexts, I'm going to offer a really simple definition. These come from the CDC. Right. So risk factors are characteristics or events or environmental factors, right, that increase the likelihood of negative outcomes. And in this case, we're talking about abuse. So these would be things that characteristics or events that increase the likelihood of abuse occurring. Protective factors on the other side of the coin, right, are characteristics or events that decrease the likelihood of negative outcomes. So these protective factors decrease, right, the likelihood of abuse occurring. And even beyond that, they buffer us from the negative outcomes or the negative effects, of those risk factors, right? It's not like a one-for-one swap. We know that protective factors can go above and beyond, right? They can prevent and they can also make our communities safer and healthier and more joyful, right? They can add more than they can just take away from. So let's talk a little bit about how these things show up. So I think that this idea of changing our behaviors, mindsets, and environments can feel really overwhelming. So let's break it down a little bit and let's talk about what we can do as individuals and then what we have to do as communities, right? So the personal work of prevention, these are the ways that we can address individual and relationship level risk and protective factors through changing our own behaviors and mindsets. Okay. So these are the things that each of us can do. So before we get into the ways that we can change these things, let's talk a little bit about what needs to be addressed. So feel free to write in the chat or come off of mute. What individual level or relational level, right? Like kind of person to person, risk factors perpetuate or increase child sexual abuse. This is just supposed to say abuse. Sorry, I don't know why it still says perpetration. I thought I took that off, but would perpetuate or increase child sexual abuse. What would you say are some of those individual risk factors or kind of relational person-to-person risk factors? Oh, wow. Randy changed it in real time and it just disappeared. That was cool. I didn't even know you could do that. Okay, I see Rachel in the chat said power imbalance. This is a huge one, right? Power imbalance. This happens often in adult-child relationships. There is an inherent power imbalance, right? Adults have access to so many more things that children do, right? Even basic things like leaving an environment, right? Most of us adults can get in the car and drive away, right? Or find a way to navigate away from a situation. Children do not have those skills. They do not have access to those resources. Okay, other risk factors I'm seeing in the chat. Someone said disabilities. Someone said, oh, this one is huge. Family beliefs that things should be dealt with internally, right? People don't need to know what happens at home. That's none of their business, right? These are really common beliefs that probably a lot of us grew up with. Lack of awareness of some of these factors, lack of boundaries with others, lack of supervision. Yes. And then we had two on supervision. Yes, these are huge. Feel free to keep writing them in the chat. I'm going to skip ahead and I'm going to show you some of the ones that some of the folks at the CDC specifically have pointed at, right, through all their research. So some of those individual level factors, right? So someone mentioned this in the chat earlier when we were talking about peer-to-peer and like youth initiation of sexual abuse behaviors. Someone said prior sexual victimization or perpetration, right? We know that people who have experienced victimization of any kind because of the neurobiological effects of trauma, right? I'm throwing out some SAT words here. Because of the neurobiological effects of trauma, our likelihood of being re-victimized increases because of the way we respond to threatening situations. Whew. It is like a global unfairness that is something that happens. But unfortunately, we know that pattern tends to persist. Other individual factors, right? Exposure to sexually explicit media, poor impulse control, substance use, lack of empathy or concern for others, aggressive behaviors, and acceptance of violent behaviors. And a lot of that comes from those behaviors being modeled, right? Especially in the home or in the family environment. So when we look at those relational risk factors, these are a lot of the things that we're seeing happen in relationships or modeled for kids, right? Family history of conflict and violence, childhood history of abuse, poor or maybe absent parent-child relationships, right? When that caregiver is not there for support in a meaningful way, that is going to be, it's going to make it really difficult for kids to feel that support in those relationships. Exposure to highly sexualized environments, social isolation or exclusion. And then we're looking at peer relationships or friend relationships, association with sexually aggressive, hypermasculine, or antisocial peers. So, okay, here we have the word perpetration again that just, right, we're just going to pretend it's not there. So what would you say are some of the individual, right, or relational level protective factors that can prevent or reduce child sexual abuse, right? So we lit up the chat with a lot of risk factors, right? We know what makes the situation more likely to have an unsafe or an abusive outcome. What factors prevent this from happening? Okay, I see folks in the chat. Lighten it up. I love it. We're so strengths-based. I love this. Having a supportive, trustworthy adult the child can go to. Yes, Rachel, you have read the ACEs research and it is showing up. Communication, open communication, knowledge for children and adults, what to look out for, family support and self-esteem, education, caring adults. Oh my gosh, I love this. No judgment or reactivity, creating safe environments. This is beautiful to read. I love when we can think of more protective factors than risk factors. That always makes me so happy because for a really long time, we could think of a million problems and it was really hard, right, for us to come up with solutions. Healthy boundaries, yes. So a couple that I'm going to toss out on the slides too. Some of these are things that you all already named, right? Emotional health and connectedness. Empathy and concerns for how one's actions affect others, education about healthy relationships and sexual development, success in school or other meaningful activities. This is a huge one, right? Because we're really talking about how to support kids to feel safe and effective, right? Have self-efficacy, have self-worth and self-esteem, as well as strong relationships with safe adults. Emotional support from a trusted, reliable adult. We truly cannot underestimate the importance of a reliable presence of a safe, trusted adult when it comes to buffering from childhood trauma and adversity, right? All of the research suggests that this is one of the strongest factors in protecting children from the harmful effects of childhood trauma and adversity, right? when we're talking about protective factors, we're also talking about positive childhood experiences, right? And the research suggests that positive childhood experiences do more than just balance out the negative ones. They actually set us up to have better outcomes than people who didn't have the trauma and didn't have positive childhood experiences. That's a whole other conversation. That's a whole other can of worms. But if you want to talk more about that, send me an email because I could get on my soapbox about this all day. Anywho, we're talking about families where caregivers work through conflicts peacefully, right? This is how children learn about navigating challenging situations, right? We learn how we deserve to be treated and how others deserve to be treated based on how the adults around us are treating each other. Healthy peer relationships also huge, right? Having healthy and supportive peers that they can talk to is also really important, especially in adolescence when that need for belonging becomes a huge emotional need for children, right? Not feeling included, not feeling isolated, and feeling connected with your peers. So let's talk a little bit about the behaviors and the mindsets piece. I'm going to go kind of quick through this because I'm a talker and I could talk about this iceberg thing all day, but we don't have all day. So let's talk a little bit about this. I'm sure everyone has heard the iceberg metaphor before. This is not new. I'm also sure that all of y'all have seen Titanic. So you know how tricky and dangerous icebergs can be, right? So the whole idea of the iceberg, is that the thing that makes it so dangerous, right, is that there's only this really small part of it that's visible above the surface of the water, right? Under the surface is the big, giant piece of ice, right? That is what gets us into trouble if you are a large ship from 100 years ago. Or probably still now. I don't really know a whole lot about ships. So this isn't what this webinar is about. So let's talk a little bit about, right, when it comes to culture of prevention and culture that perpetuates abuse, the tip of the iceberg, the piece that is visible to us are our behaviors, right? These are the ways that we interact with each other and with institutions around us, the things that are observable, the ways that we respond to information and approach situations, right? Because our brains are taking in truly an unbelievable amount of information at all times, we really rely on these observable behaviors to help us make sense of the world. Because if we had to process every single piece of information that we encountered on a daily basis, like our brains, we would not be able to get out of bed. It would be too overwhelming. So we rely on some of these behavioral shortcuts to tell us what people are doing, right? And how to act. This gives us a lot of information, even more than we know, right? Just from seeing me in this little Zoom square, I've already given you a ton of information about myself, even if we've never met before, right? Behaviorally. You know that I wear glasses, which means I probably need a little help to see, right? You can see that Zoom is making my hair all weird, right? Which means I probably have curly hair and maybe my office is a little bit messy and that's why I have my Zoom background on, right? There's a lot that you're picking up just from some of these observable things. So underneath the surface of the behaviors are where the narratives live, right? The narratives are what supports our behaviors and our behaviors are built off of these narratives. So narratives are these themes and ideas that permeate these larger collections of cultural stories, right? So earlier, Randy gave the example, right, when we were talking about the data about child sexual abuse and how in reality, the vast majority, right, of sexual abuse is perpetrated by someone who is known to the child and has a relationship to the child. But for a lot of us, the story that we grew up with was about stranger danger, right? I'm sure, like, I don't even have to explain what that phrase means for most of us because you're like, oh yeah, stranger danger, right? We had this story, right, that the people that we had to be wary of were strangers, were not the people who were close to us. That we found strangers untrustworthy, we were maybe uncomfortable around strangers, and strangers kind of encompass this big category of people that we didn't know and people who maybe were different from us. There's a lot of reasons, there's a lot of things we could unpack about that. Again, if we had a whole lot more time. But that is one of the stories, right? It became a narrative about child abuse that we heard. So for a long time, people had a really difficult time understanding or really believing when kids made disclosures about abuse that was perpetrated by people close to them. right? By family members, by family friends, by neighbors, by teachers or coaches, by people that they knew. Because what lived in our heads was this story about stranger danger. And it made it really difficult for us to see what was really going on because we were really absorbed by this narrative. Underneath the narrative, right, is this overwhelming mindset. The mindset is the deep assumed pattern of thinking that shapes the way that we see the world and the way that we make sense of things, right? So this can feel really abstract. Let me give an example. So a mindset that I run into a lot when I talk to people, that maybe you all run into when you talk to people, is that child abuse is inevitable. It happens. There are just bad people out there who want to hurt kids, and the best thing that we can do is try to stop them and catch them. Has anyone else heard this kind of story before about abuse? I have. Maybe. Some people are like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe not as much anymore, which is good. All right. If the story is changing, that's good. For a long time, I think this is what we heard. And even people who are really close to me, I've had conversations with people in my family, right, who know that this is the work that I do. And we have these conversations and they're like, yeah, well, it's great that you're doing this, but it's not like you're ever going to stop people from hurting kids. There are bad people out there who do bad things. Right? So when we have that mindset, it props up these narratives, right? Stranger danger. There are those bad people out there. I don't know who they are, but they're out there doing bad stuff, right? It also gives us this belief that is often perpetuated that perpetrators are perpetrators, right, of abuse or of violence in general are really sophisticated and they can only be identified by law enforcement, right? When we think we can't prevent this from happening, we just have to stop people. That means that they must be way smarter than us. They must have figured all this stuff out, right? And somebody like me, who's not a detective or an attorney, or a police officer, I got no badges of any kind, right? What business do I have trying to prevent abuse? This also, I'm going to be honest, does a lot of their work for them, right? Stop giving people the benefit of the doubt that they're smart and sophisticated just because they're doing things that are harmful. That doesn't help us. And don't give them any extra credit. And I also think that this shows up in our behaviors, right? When we believe this, we are less likely and less willing to take risks in our personal lives when we see someone pushing a boundary or violating a boundary. Because we have this story that, well, actually, the people who are hurting kids are those strangers or the people who fit this stereotype or assumption. They're not my neighbor. They're not this member of my family. They're not this friend that I've known for a long time. They're not this person who actually really likes kids and is nice to kids, right? So why would I call them out or say something when the story that I know about abuse is that scary bad people are the ones who are doing it, not my cousin, not my neighbor, you know. It also means that we are less comfortable around strangers, right? We're less likely to take risks and we're more likely to normalize boundary pushing and boundary violating for kids. So what happens if we reframe this, right? If we look at what it would take to build out a prevention culture, to change our mindset and our behaviors, right? If we instead adopt and buy into the mindset that child sexual abuse is preventable and that each of us can make a difference in keeping kids safe, that what we say and what we do matters, and we operate from that worldview, our behaviors are going to look super different, right? Just thinking that and believing it and trying it on, even if it doesn't feel super comfortable at first, trying it on and thinking about it opens you up to take a lot of different actions than you would otherwise. So when we adopt this prevention worldview, right, we tap into other narratives. Most people want to keep kids safe, right? Having information, having knowledge is power, right? When we know better, we do better. And we can also buy into ideas that things like setting behavior or setting boundaries, sorry, isn't rude. It's modeling how children deserve to be treated. When we step outside of our comfort zones to set a boundary or to enforce and hold a boundary, what we're showing to the children around us is that this is something that you can do too. That I'm taking your boundaries really seriously, right? When we were growing up, when we were kids, it might have been the norm to say, okay, go give grandma and grandpa or uncle so and so and aunt so and so a hug, whether you wanted a hug or not, right? This is so simple, right? But now I'm seeing, I know you all probably are too, a huge shift in the way that people are talking to their kids about boundaries, right? My kid, he first of all, he's very strong-willed. If he doesn't want to give you a hug, you're not getting a hug. But he also knows he doesn't have to. He's not going to be in trouble, right? We're not going to say he's being rude or disrespectful because his body belongs to him. And by deciding whether or not he gets to give a hug, he is practicing from a really young age. And again, I'm not worried about him setting boundaries. He's really good at it already. It is natural for him. um, but I'm not worried about him thinking that he has to share his body with people in ways that he doesn't feel comfortable with, right? And that doesn't mean we're not going to keep having the conversation, but that means that that's the new narrative that we're trying to adopt and share. And the way that this shows up in our behaviors, right, is that we verbalize and normalize setting boundaries. We talk to the children around us about safety and consent. We also talk to the adults around us about that, right? We reframe for adults who maybe haven't bought into this mindset, like, oh, that doesn't mean they're being disrespectful. They just must not be feeling like giving hugs. Maybe they can give you a high five instead, right? We do a lot of like high five, fist bump, wave, whatever alternatives, right? It doesn't mean they don't care about you. It doesn't mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean that they don't want to be around you, right? It means that that's not what they're comfortable with right now, and we have to be okay with that. The same way that we would want them to be, or we would need to be okay with saying like, "Hey, we don't hit our friends either." That's the same kind of boundary. It's a safety boundary. Um, and then we speak up when we see something concerning happening, whether it's someone that we know or someone that we don't know, and particularly, right, when it's people who have a position of power or authority. That's a tough one, but I'm just going to set that there. So that was a lot of information, and y'all are hanging with me. I'm seeing some head nods, maybe some zoning out. That's okay too. It's early. Let's talk a little bit about the community work of prevention, right? We were talking a lot about the individual personal work of prevention that requires us to look at our behaviors and our mindsets. Let's talk about these environmental factors, right? Because we know that environmental factors have a huge impact on our outcomes, right? On health and safety. So let's talk about how we can address community and societal risk and protective factors through environmental and policy change. So we did a little brainstorming earlier about those individual, right, and relationship risk factors. Tell me about community risk factors, or these really zoomed out society risk factors. What risk factors exist in our communities or in our country that perpetuate or increase child sexual abuse? Okay, I'm seeing folks in the chat already. Social media. Somebody said the idea is that like people say we can't do anything or I already know what to do, right? Lack of accountability. Somebody said I'm guessing patriarchy, sexualized media. Okay, y'all are lighting up the chat and I love this. Keep it coming. Feel free. Family and addiction. Yes. Yes. Access to others via social media, information, purity culture, acceptance of acceptance of this in places of power, too busy to make it to train. Yeah, we have so many demands on our time. I just want to name that. That's real. Poverty and societal norms. Yes, you always are zooming out and I love it. Um, this is amazing. Amazing, amazing. Lack of parenting education and support. That is huge. That happens in quote unquote other people's families. Yes, absolutely. Feel free, keep through. Oh, yeah, isolation, isolated families, lack of accurate, comprehensive sex ed. Jessica said, did somebody leak the next slide? I'm gonna throw it up there just because you guys are gonna get all my good ones before I get a chance to share them. Feel free to keep throwing them in the chat, but you guys see what's happening. You have zoomed out and you can see it so clearly, and I love that. So we're looking at community risk factors, right? Environments and factors in the community that we live in that make child abuse more likely to happen. We're talking about poverty, lack of resources, right? We're talking about lack of employment opportunities and access to a living wage. We're talking about housing instability, addiction or eviction, and homelessness. We're talking about, I'm going to start with just those three. All of those things make it so much more likely for children to not have safe places to be. Right? That is the first thing I want to say. I'm not trying to say that people who live in poverty, right, or who experience poverty are more likely to harm their children. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying about these environmental factors is that if someone is evicted from their home or doesn't have a safe place to live, they are more likely to find a place to stay that is not safe, right? If somebody does not have access to childcare, right, or they are working so much to try to make ends meet that they don't have access to support, right? They're working days and nights, right? They are more likely to have to rely on, right, maybe less stable or less reliable childcare. And all of these things expose children to unsafe environments. Lack of support or oversight in youth spaces, general tolerance of sexual violence in the community, weak community sanctions against sexual violence perpetrators, and then community violence of all kinds. When we zoom out even further and look at like our larger kind of society and culture, right? You guys nailed a lot of these. We're talking about norms that support or normalize sexual violence. We're talking about society norms that support or maintain gender inequality. We're talking about negative attitudes or beliefs against identity groups, right, and marginalized communities. We're talking about weak laws, policies, and responses to sexual violence. And we're talking about high levels of violence in general, right? Oh, I'm catching up in the chat. Yes. So, this conversation between Tiffany and Pamela, absolutely. Tiffany said untreated mental health issues. Pamela said yes, particularly given the extreme lack of mental health treatment, right? When people can't access the services that they need, right? When they don't have a way to pay for those services, when they don't have a way to get to those services, when they're on a wait list for 6 months, when they're just aren't available in their community, right? Folks are going to get sicker and they're going to struggle, right? And that is going to impact every aspect of their lives. Yes, I'm seeing not having opening communication. Absolutely. Okay, let's flip it again, right? This one can feel challenging because we're zooming out and I'm asking you to envision a world that we don't live in right now, right? What community or societal protective factors prevent or reduce child sexual abuse? Community resources, education, adults who are willing to speak up. Ooh. Keep it coming, y'all. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Someone said obviously training. Yes. Access to education, healthcare, livable wage, housing, education, adults willing to provide safe environments, advocacy, stable living, resources, support, awareness, mental health treatment, training and education, access to systems. Whoa, this is great. This is great. I know I'm a nerd because I'm getting like an adrenaline rush from seeing you guys in the chat writing all these things. Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to throw up what I have again before you guys beat me to it, right? So some of these community level protective factors that we know prevent violence and keep us safe and give us better health outcomes, physical health and mental health outcomes, um, than just the lack of violence. Social cohesion and connectedness, right? Feeling like you belong in your community, knowing the other people who live there, right? Can you borrow a cup of sugar from your neighbor? Obviously, that's an old school example, right? Maybe it doesn't look like that anymore, but but or maybe it does. I don't know. I've been to the grocery store and everything is very expensive, so maybe we are borrowing cups of sugar again. Um, Feeling a connection, right, means that we look out for each other. It means that we know what's going on. And it means that people are communicating. I saw communication in the chat like multiple times, right? That we are communicating about what we need, what's going on, so that we have other sets of eyes, right? Accountability and community sanctions for perpetrators of sexual violence, holding people accountable when there is harm done, right? We talked about how much underreporting way back, right? We talked about how even the best data that we have is not the whole picture because of the level of underreporting of child abuse and of all forms of interpersonal violence, right? So we know that when people don't even know what's going on, it is going to be impossible to get accountability, right? For those who have caused harm. Schools and youth serving organizations with policies and practices that center youth safety and well-being, right? Safe environments where kids are spending their time learning, playing, worshiping, socializing, right? Resting. Physical environments that promote visibility, safety, and connection. That looks like in those organizations, but also looks like in communities, right? It looks like you can feel the difference in a neighborhood where everybody's out on their porch in the evening and people are saying hi to each other and chatting, right? Versus one where everybody's inside, doors are closed, blinds are down, right? Fences are up, right? There's different feel in there. There's a different feeling of connectedness and visibility and safety. And then looking at the societal level, you guys nailed these, right? Access to well-paying jobs and financial supports, access to safe, affordable housing, access to quality and affordable childcare, to mental health care and substance use treatment, and healthcare in general, right? Um, and then comprehensive sexual health education that addresses healthy relationships, right? That addresses communication and boundaries and all these things that we were talking about, right? So when we talk about moving upstream, right, for community level prevention, there's a lot of things. I'm going to flip back. There's a lot of things on this list that might feel like a really far reach for us right now. We'd be like, yeah, of course we all want to have quality, affordable childcare. And the world that we live in right now, that's not what we have, right? Um, People are paying more than their rent or their mortgage for childcare, right? And somehow the people who are doing the childcare are not being compensated for all the work that they're doing. Like we are just living in a system, right, that is not set up to operate within these protective factor frameworks right now. So we know we have a lot of work to do. So it can feel overwhelming, but some of the things that we can do, right, is we can start at that mindset level, right? We can start with like hearts and minds, participate in social norms change campaigns in your community and across the state. You may be familiar with the Missouri Children's Trust Fund, Something We Agree On campaign. If you aren't, check it out. Maybe we can drop a link in the chat actually, so people who are curious can check it out. Social norms change and positive community norms change. It can feel kind of slow moving, but it is so real and the payoff is incredible, right? Because what we're doing is shifting norms in our community away from a place where we don't talk about things like abuse to a place where children have multiple safe adults that they can connect with, right? Whether it's at home or at school or in the other places where they're spending their time, right? Where they can talk about safety, boundaries, right? They can talk about navigating social media and relationships and all these tricky things that come with growing up, Um, Other things that we can do that are within our grasp here, right? Assess the policies, practices, and environments for safety in the places where you live, you learn, you work, you worship, and you socialize, right? Your workplace, right? Especially if you have kids coming on site, right? How can we look at the policies, practices, and physical environment to make sure that it is set up for safety, that it is set up to prioritize safety and well-being of children, and that the folks who are working in those spaces have the skills and the resources that they need to keep kids safe. Because it is a team effort. If any of us could do it by ourselves, we already would have, right? Check, check, check. We would have knocked it off the list. And if you're curious more about that, I think Randy put some information in the chat earlier about that awareness to action program. That is a tool. That is one of the tools in your toolkit to do that. We have awareness to action facilitators around the state who can help roll out that program in your organization, whether it's your workplace, your church community, your youth serving organization. And then zooming out even more, right? We can advocate for policy changes that address those risk factors, right? When we know there are certain things that are making it less safe in our communities, we want to get rid of those things. And a lot of those we can do at the city, right? At your community level, right? Learn what your city council or your board of aldermen is up to. What are they doing? Who is your most local representative, right? Who's your city council person? What do they care about? And how does it align with what you care about? And then looking at advocating for policy changes that promote and enhance the protective factors too, right? We don't just want to like stamp out the risk factors. We want the protective factors to flourish and take up way more space than the risk factors ever did. So we can do that at our local level. We can also do that at our state level. If you're curious in what that looks like, one of the places I know Jessica at the beginning was talking about budget, right? Our state budget is how we set our state's priorities, right? Maybe you've heard this phrase before. I think about it all the time. Budgets are a moral document, right? They show you what matters by what we put our money to, right? So if we want to promote and enhance protective factors, we have to make sure that those show up in the ways that we're allocating our resources. Okay. If you are curious about digging into more of these topics and tools, I want to share some of our upcoming trainings. MoNACA's Prevention Skill Builder series is an online training series. Every other month, we host a webinar on the second Friday at 9 on Zoom. Those are also recorded. So we'd love to have people in person to participate in the conversation and ask their questions, but we have been recording them as well to make sure that folks can still get the material and the information. We alternate between, yes, we will send, yeah. Yes, you'll get those in the follow-up email, I believe, as well. Is that right, Tenley? Yeah, okay. So we alternate between a school-based topic for our folks who are working in the school systems and community-based topic, right? So coming up later this year, so far we've talked about classroom management skills for school-based prevention. And then most recently, we were talking about some of the same things we were talking about. We were talking about messaging, and we were looking a lot about community readiness and how to move people kind of up the readiness ladder in terms of buying into and engaging with these prevention beliefs. So in June, we're going to be talking about relationship building and communication with school partners. In August, we're going to be doing, in collaboration with the St. Louis Anti-Violence Project, navigating tough questions and challenging conversations in the community. October, we're going to be looking at hotspot mapping for safer schools. So really focusing on those environmental changes that we can make in the school setting. And then similarly, in December, we're going to be doing asset mapping. So looking at environmental factors in communities. And again, this is going to be shared out too. We always like to share a couple of really easy lifts, right? A lot of people feel like, okay, I got to do something. We've had this conversation and I want to do something. I want to operationalize what I learned, right? So there are a couple of action steps you can take, right? Randy has dropped some stuff in the chat, and I know there's going to be a follow-up email with some of these materials as well. So keep learning, right? Explore some of these topics. If you're curious about any of these things that we talked about, feel free to check out one of our trainings. That little QR code will sign you up for our newsletter so that you can get access to those trainings as they're available in your inbox. And I think we can probably also drop that in the chat if you're not wanting to scan the QR code. If you want to learn more about some of these other things like positive childhood experiences or community protective factors, there's so much to explore there too. Feel free to reach out to us or do some digging on your own. Please share what you learn, right? Talking to one other person is one of those behavioral changes. Love it. We can do that. Easy, check. But it also continues, right, the conversation. And it gets more folks thinking about how we can address these things at the community level, right? We want to make individual changes and we want our environments to shift too, right? And then lastly, go upstream. Tackle one of those upstream actions, right? Review the policies and protocols at your organization and advocate for protective policies, right? Learn a little bit more about best practices for child safety in organizations. There's a lot that we can do to move the needle in our spaces and then in our communities as a whole. All right, we are so close to the end of our time. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. We have a ton of resources in the chat, and we also have some stuff that's going to come to you all in the follow-up email. I know that we're close on time, but are there questions or thoughts that folks want to share before we wrap up our time together? I also think that the MoACTS team might have an announcement that they need to share as well.
Yes, so thank you. I want to say thank you to Kiki, Jessica, and Randy. Thank you all for your presentations about the Missouri Network Against Child Abuse. This was fantastic, and I think there are a lot of takeaway actions that everyone got out of this today, so thank you. Before we allow for the question and answer portion, I just want to shout out once again the upcoming MoACTS trainings. So we have a variety coming up within the next couple of months. We've got some advanced TFCBT trainings. We've got clinical supervision. We've got the peer review launch event, the informational call for our forensic interviewers at CACs. And then next week we have What We Think We Know, Understanding Child Abuse Disclosures, looking at child abuse disclosures with the lens of the core concepts of childhood trauma. And then once again, our addressing traumatic grief training. So we have lots and lots of good stuff coming up, not to mention our other speaker series that we have. All of these upcoming speaker series and paper person trainings can be found on the MoACTS website. You can either scan this QR code and you'll be taken directly to our website, or you can go to www.moacts.org to find all of the trainings that we have listed. And then once more, we just wanted to give a huge shout out to the staff from the Missouri Network Against Child Abuse. Thank you for being here today. And thank you to all of our viewers and all of you do for children and their families. Thank you.